damn it, Dale.
Well, that's because USAID is distributing organizations in the entire federal government. It may rank number one, in fact. USAID is under the cloak of being a humanitarian aid organization designed to advance U.S. foreign policy, is assigned the dirtiest tasks that the State Department can't get caught doing, and that used to be done directly by the CIA. But USAID is able to act as essentially a covert operations division in the way that the CIA used to, except it's not even bound by the requirement of a presidential finding to authorize a covert operation that the CIA does, which is why what you've seen for the past 2 decades is that most of the international scandals involving spycraft have had to deal with USAID rather than CIA. And if you understand the CIA's history with money laundering, you'll begin to get a glimpse at the size of the problem with USAID and why they won't let either congressional oversight or DOJ see their books.
Oh, man. Man, oh, man.
Is USAID a direct government agency?
Yes.
And they wouldn't let congressional oversight take a look at their books.
Yeah, that the United States.
That's pretty bold.
Yeah, the United States Agency for International Development, I believe is what it stands for, USAID. Mm-hmm. But it has long been a well-known front for CIA fuckery. That's been well understood for quite a while. In fact, I would invite anybody to go riffing through the historical record and look at, and not just, I'm not talking about all the stuff they're finding, but just go back historically and look at what USAID has done. But it's gone off the reservation, as the old phrase goes, the old agency phrase goes. So first I have to sort of out myself. We're going to talk about USAID. And a lot of people know this, which is sort of the weird part about my former life as a spook for the CIA. So I was there for a little while post 9/11. In fact, the quickest explanation would be 9/11 happened. I was in the Marine Corps. I was on my way out of the Marine Corps, and then I got stop lost. And while I was stop lost, I was in the reserves. I was my application was, I had an application at the FBI. Like a lot of people, I ran to the sound of the guns and thought I had something to offer. And so when the agency finished sifting out through the tens of thousands of people who had come down and said, I want to join the CIA, what it sifted out in the hunt for bin Laden was yours truly. That may be a horrifying thought. In fact, that may very well tell you just about the sad state of affairs for our government, that when they needed someone to go hunt bin Laden and they sifted out of all the applicants, what they spit out was me and a bunch of my knuckleheads.
You were the cream that rose to the top of the crop.
Sure.
Or the fly sitting on top of the turd.
Right. Or I was what flushed out of the back end. But anyway, and I did that for a little while. Now I'm not supposed to say that. I was commercially covered officer and all this, but let me just point out how ridiculous this was. Like one example of this. So I'm in Afghanistan one day, and I'm running around with my beard and doing my Allahu Akbar stuff. And we got to coordinate some air support. We weren't too far from a base. And where I was, the CIA base had operational control of the whole area. And of course, there's also the weird part, like when I was first going to these agency info sessions and stuff with the recruiter, and there were a lot of people in there, a lot of mill guys too, former mill guys. And we're all in there kind of getting to know each other, and you go through this whole, like, it was a long process to sift through, psych tests and polygraphs and all that shit, background investigations. So we get through, and then we do all the training. Now I'm in Afghanistan. We go over to coordinate for some air support, and we go over to this base. And of course, who do we run into as we're pulling up to go coordinate for this operation? It's me, a good buddy of mine, dead now. He's a star on the wall, in fact, at Langley. A guy by the name of Nate Delamar, who's buried in Section 31 at Arlington, a former Marine himself, in fact. But so Nate and I go over to coordinate some air, and Nate knew I was a former Marine aviator. He liked to give me some shit about that because he was a grunt. And so we go over and we walk into this squadron, and we go up and see the thing, and I'm like, oh shit, look at that! It's 775, HMLA 775. It's the reserve Cobra Squadron, Cobra Huey Squadron. they're there on this 7-month deployment. And so I walk into the door to coordinate with these guys. We roll into their ops center, and I walk in. And as soon as I walk in, I see half of the guys in there are guys I flew with, like guys I was in. Now they're in the reserves, but they were guys I was on active duty with. Like the guy who was their operations officer was in my squadron. I gave him his check ride for turf navigate. I was one of his instructors for thing. So I go walking in, and they're like, "Barton, yeah!" And one of the guys like, "I knew that's where you went, you son of a bitch. I got to tell my wife." I'm like, "No, not even hearing my true name." I'm like, right. So it was one of those things where like, and I said,
so you were really good at OPSEC, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm like, well,
you got star honors there,
right? It's funny you say that because I said I had a classmate, a guy I'd gone through the agency with, who was a former Navy SEAL. Also, as it turns out, it's funny you bring him up. Funny you bring up that thing. So I said to him, he was a former Navy SEAL Academy grad, a guy named Brian Hoke, a great guy. And he said, I asked him one time, because he kept running into Navy SEAL buddies, right? So we're out there doing ops, and he keeps running into guys. He was in SDV Team 2, and I'm like, how do you handle that, Brian? And he goes, bro, if these guys are bad, if that's what I worry about, he goes, if they're the ones turning me into the bad guys, we're all fucked anyway. He said, OPSEC isn't, cover stories aren't for the bros I served with. And I was kind of like, oh yeah, that's a good point. You know what I mean? And so it's kind of like, yeah, okay, all right, that's a good point. Like if these guys who we're using for air support can't be trusted with my cover, here in Afghanistan or whatever. But it kind of made it funny because all these people who knew me were like, I was at Langley one time. This is how
but it is one of those things, just to make the counterpoint that like from a civilian point of view, it's not you being stupid that gets you caught. It's somebody telling a story at the grocery line to somebody at the grocery store, and then it's like someone overhears it that like 1 in a bazillion chance that they overhear that story, and they're like, what? And I think how those things go downhill.
Yeah, I think the movies do a good job of kind of capturing that. It is really one of those things where the more information is out there, the more likely it is to bump into the wrong, to have the wrong coincidence, to have the wrong serendipity that you can't afford. Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, it didn't matter. But it was really a funny thing because a lot of the people who knew me were like, oh, I wondered where you went. That's where you went. They were all like, I bump into people in the military, Right. And by the way, all of this is sort of ridiculous. Like I didn't choose to be put into commercial cover. Like I was just leaving the Marine Corps. I've been in the military.
What does commercial cover mean?
Means I was nominally, I had an identity. I was working for a company that had been set up. I was not under like State Department cover or military cover. I had a civilian job nominally doing stuff. But really, that was sort of my cover story, my day job. And then at night, I'm out.
So kind of like Lex Friedman.
Like what?
Like Lex Friedman. That was a joke.
Sure. But so anyway, the funny thing is, so all the people in the Marine Corps knew, and it was a little weird. It's also like I disappeared, and then all of a sudden I popped up in Afghanistan. So anyway, I have a good bit of knowledge about how all of this stuff works. At least I did 20 years ago when I was there, and I left a long time ago. In fact, the best thing I can say about my time at the agency, the best thing that came out of that was that's where I found CrossFit. Mm-hmm. And then, in fact, I used to post on the message boards. I won't, back in the day, I posted under an alias because I was out in alias. And then eventually, when I came to work for Greg, I was kind of told him, and he was like, all right, don't worry about it. So, and there are a lot of people like that, but a lot of us, that's what, we found it because the team guys were all doing it. So in any event, I have some knowledge about how things work there. And so it makes all of what we're witnessing glorious. But it's not surprising me that we're finding the fraud that we're finding. And I got some great stories about that. So Ben's was a State Department guy. Ben's was a State Department guy, I guess. And for those who haven't been following this, or, I love the notion that, and it's a little depressing when you hear it, but politics is the entertainment wing of the military industrial complex. I don't know who said that. I read that somewhere lately. Frank Zappa did.
I thought it was Hollywood for Ugly People.
Yeah, Hollywood for Ugly People is another one. But Zappa said, I think pretty sure Frank Zappa said that politics was the entertainment wing of the MIC. And I thought, oh, that's not bad.
Yeah.
And you're starting to find out that really this USAID sort of exposure is glorious for those of us who, for years have been screaming it's all corrupt, it's all bad, and it's all fugazi, that the whole thing's fake. And it is. And USAID, I mean, you can just flip through there. I'd love to have a spreadsheet. I mean, I would just love to see, and it'll come out. In fact, I think you can. I think you can go sort through it and see how, like, 5.3 million to, transgender Elmo or whatever, in Colombia,
Right.
all the crazy shit that's been coming out, and what you're really going to find out, and this is the next layer of it that people are going to come to realize, is that there never was Elmo in Iraq. That never happened. That money wound up in somebody's pocket.
Well, the aid to Haiti, I believe the number that I saw was that we've sent $4 billion to Haiti, but only 2% of it ended up in Haiti, and the other 98% ended up with consultants.
Yep,
in DC.
That's what's going to happen. So that NGO model really came about, I think. Maybe it probably goes back a lot further than.
Well, can we somehow short real estate in the DC metro area?
Oh, it's glorious. Gonna be a lot of housing coming up, I think. They have something like 6 of the top 10 zip codes by per capita income are in DC, and yet DC makes nothing. There's no manufacturing in Northern Virginia. I lived there for a lot of years. Lived there when I was at the agency. And
Baltimore, not a real hotbed of commerce.
No, there's nothing in Northern Virginia, and yet it's exploded in. And I mean, I was there. I remember being there as a young lieutenant at Quantico in 1981. I could get on my motorcycle. I used to, in fact. I would whip up to DC. It was about a 35 to 40 minute drive. I could just rip up on my motorcycle. I remember one time picking up my my then fiance, the first Mrs. Saran, and picking her up at the train station. And it was a nothing ride, just rip right on up, and then turn around and come back. And now it's a 4 hour. I've sat in traffic for 4 or 5 hours. DC traffic, some of the Northern Virginia traffic, some of the worst in the world. And it essentially, DC has expanded. For those that have been there, the blob has just sort of it's just grown out like this. And now Stafford, Virginia, which is like 35, 40 miles south of DC, is now the suburbs fundamentally. It used to be just that Alexandria was, but now it's spread west and south, and everywhere is just the suburbs of DC, and that's all the money there. And yet it produces nothing. I mean, what does it make? Where's all that money going? Well, we're finding out it's going into the pockets of politicians and their foot soldiers, and it's largely been a money laundering op for both sides of the aisle. But Democrats are better at that NGO thing than Republicans are. And so maybe it's that nobody for a minute would ever believe that Republicans would be doing that much charitable work. So,
well, I think Republicans in the political sense are largely the Washington Generals of politics, that they are the foils for the Democrats to dunk on.
Yeah, for sure. And that's all changing now. We're witnessing a renaissance in many ways. And this is what I wanted to bring up to you. This was the point, and I wanted to see your reaction to my analogy here. I think, especially given what we've talked about, what we started about with truth and sort of larger things about truth-seeking endeavors, and there's none of that around DC. But I think what's happening, what we're witnessing, and the gnashing, rending of garments and all that, people losing their mind and freaking out over Elon and what he's doing. We are witnessing the collapse, I think, of the secular religion. I think what we're witnessing, I think the only thing that comes close to this historically right now is the Reformation, is Martin Luther's publication of his 99 Theses and the collapse, I won't call it collapse, but the subsequent Reformation of the Catholic Church, the new religions that came out of it, Protestantism, Anglicanism, in all the various forms. I think what we're going through right now is we're watching the collapse of the church of state religion. I think for a long time, the secular humanist, rationalist, materialist view of the world has been dominant, ascendant, and then it all sort of I think maybe the collapse of the pullout of Afghanistan. I've mentioned this before. I don't know if I think I sent you this essay, but there's a brilliant essay called "Farewell to Bourgeois Kings," and I highly recommend that to anybody. Read that. That's as good a piece as you're ever going to read on this related topic of the collapse of the expertocracy. But that's been the dominant, U.S. model for 100 years. We've been living through the sort of managed MBA view of the world that we could manage these complex things, and what it took was this expertocracy, and they were going to take us to nirvana. And now it's all coming unglued. And actually, as it turns out, when you pop the lid off, all you see is maggots and roaches and just horrible shit. But I think it's that, and I'm not going to blame the boomers. Those are my parents. God bless them. I love them. They're great, and they're not typical boomers at all. But that generation,
I'll blame the boomers. Your parents may have been great, but as a culture, as a generation, they were scumbags.
Yeah, I think the big thing is my sympathy for boomers is that, my mom talked about they were the first generation to get the idiot box, to get TVs. I think my mom got her first TV when she was
were
14.
Probably the first generation that was completely self-centered.
I think they were the first generation that got mind raped. I think.
Okay, so they're born. The first thing that they do is say, "Hey, everybody who's over 65 has to retire so that we can take the jobs." And then as soon as they get old, they're like, "Hey, no more mandatory 65. We want to keep the jobs." And then as soon as their kids go to school, they go, "Hey, we need to vote." Everything that the boomers have done has been a wealth transfer from either the generation before them to them or the generation after them to them.
Yes,
as a generation. Now, again, I'm giving your parents individually a pass.
Yeah, of course.
But as a generation,
for sure,
they are scumbags, and most of what we see in our problems that we see in our government is
it is true. I give them this.
By them.
I think it's worth seeing boomers in context, and that is to say, they were born right after World War II. That's what defines the boomer generation. They were that baby boom that followed all the folks coming
World War II. That's
yes. Yeah. And my dad and mom both were born within a week of each other, March 2nd and March 9th, 1947. And my dad was child number 4, I believe. So my grandfather and grandmother had 3 kids. He went to the war. He was gone for a couple of years. He came back, and then dad's born. My dad's born, and my mom. In fact, kind of similar. My mom's mom came from England, survived the Blitz, survived the bombing of Germany. The bombing of England by Germany, and then came on a boat over to the U.S. and my mom was born. So they're both right smack pure boomers. But that time, 47, it's important to put it in context to what came before, and that's the thing I think we kind of do sometimes when we look at generations. We go, "Oh, you guys suck," like the me generation or whatever, this generation, and we divorce it from what preceded it, and we give away responsibility for what about those parents, So the interesting thing, and I don't want to absolve them of all responsibility, but I'll just say that the 20s and what had preceded it, and the Great Depression and all of that. We didn't have mass media. All we had was radio. Everybody's information was controlled. And really, most people didn't even care about what was going on. But the methods of mass control, World War I was the industrialization of war. And I would invite anybody. I live not far from Kansas City, not too far. And the National World War I Memorial is actually here in Kansas City. It's right in downtown, right across from Union Station on top of this hill. It's beautiful. It's an amazing. So it's weird, of all the World War II memorials and all that stuff is in DC, but the World War I memorial, it's almost like they wanted to hide it. And so they stuck it out here in the middle of the country. It's amazing. And what you really realize about World War I is that was the real industrialization of war, when we turned all of the production that people could do collectively into a mass effort at destroying other human beings, and along with that, some very important people came along, a guy named Edward Bernays, and people point to Bernays' book, but the one I think that people would do well to look at is a guy named Walter Lippmann. And Lippmann wrote a book called, I can't remember what the name of it is, but it was where it might be manufacturing consent. And Lippmann was really, he was worked in the State Department. He worked directly for President Woodrow Wilson. He was a diplomat. He did a lot of things, but he was the guy who came up with the notion that leaders would have to essentially propagandize their populace in order to get all of that massive energy and effort and move it in a productive way by these government bureaucrats who were trained in all this stuff. And that was the only way that we could really get anything done in the modern society. And so all of the information control stuff comes out of manufacturing consent. People will look up that term, and you'll probably find if you type in manufacturing consent or manufactured consent, you'll get Noam Chomsky's book. But Chomsky in his book that he wrote with somebody else that he got famous for, he actually credits Lippmann, and that's where the term is borrowed from. It's from Walter Lippmann. So
the book that Lippmann used it in is Public Opinion.
Public Opinion. That's it. Thank you. Yes, thank you. And that book became hugely influential in political circles about how they were going to manipulate people. And I think by the time the boomers are born, the efforts at manufacturing consent from the populace had been just about perfected. And so cue the conspiracy theories around World War II, and there's a lot to deconstruct about FDR and a lot of things that preceded. But it's Lippmann and Bernays and some of the others who bought into that whole hog. And I think the boomers, I consider them the first generation that was truly had their minds raped from early on. And so, like, I can remember my mom being horrified by like Nixon, and and her takeaway from that was that Nixon was a horrible human being and the Republicans were the worst thing ever. And that whole incident is what made the Republicans the Washington Generals. The reality is that Nixon's impeachment and the White House break-in and all that, I mean, the Watergate break-in by the plumbers was by comparison.
By the CIA?
Yeah, right. Yes.
Coming full circle.
I mean, yes, the reporters, everybody involved in that is a former agency guy. Including Woodward.
Former.
Yeah, right. I get that too. That's why I have to be careful about that and telling people, because I had a friend of mine, a guy I knew. He was like, he knew but he was one of the people who was witting. I had put him down on my list of people who would know that I was in,
Mm-hmm.
And then I was out and I bumped into him. We were at a bar or something, and I was talking to him. I forget what we were talking about. He kind of leaned over to me close and he's like, "Hey, you still doing work?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not." "What are you fucking talking about?" I'm like, "No." And he was like, "Well, I always kind of understood that you never really leave there. You're never really off the books." I'm like, "Well, you fuck off." So I'm sure someone.
Well, I mean, at the time, Bob Woodward, the reporter who had the Deep Throat connection.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't until, has he ever actually admitted he was CIA, or has he just been like, it's been alluded to? I don't think he's ever actually like said, "You got me."
Yeah, no. They'll take that to their grave. But so again, I'm not cutting the boomers complete slack, but on the other hand, I think they were the first generation to really, the techniques couldn't be used on their parents. My grandfather, because they weren't around, they didn't exist really. And they weren't really perfected, I think, until the 30s and into the 40s. And so by the time TV comes around, the power of that, I mean, it seems so naive and simple now, given what we have, the information that's coming out. But think about how long we went where it was just 3 television stations. And the news was essentially, your choice was whether you wanted to hear Walter Cronkite tell you, or Dan Rather, or, you know what I mean? Which guy with the stentorian voice and the basso delivery were you going to get? That was it. And you might get variations on things, but it was really that television was a huge lever of control. And to this day, like I go to my mom's house, you know, God, I love her. But you go there and the TV's on CNN and it's just nonstop bullshit, you know, and I
Well,
see it and start like,
one
oh
of
my,
those. It's one of those conspiracy NLP things where it's like, well, what do they show on TV?
yeah,
Programming.
yeah.
You know, they're
All the
programming.
words around that are so great.
Yeah.
You know, like, I mean, all the terms that, yeah, it is programming for sure. But so I think the internet in many ways was something that was, and again, that was a DARPA project as well. So, I mean, I've got some great, you know, Greg's old man, Greg Glassman, I'm talking about, his dad, who was a rocket scientist, who did a lot of crazy, cool shit too. And at Hughes Aircraft Company, a lot of classified shit, a lot of radar shit, but he would never get Gmail. Never. He wanted to keep his little, you know, Cable One or whatever it was, you know, local cable provider email. He wanted nothing to do. When we were using Google Suite, you know, I think he was like, nope. Wanted nothing to do with the internet. And so here's a great conspiracy theory. People love this and tell you something about Google. But I said something to him one time about it. And all he said to me was this. He's like, Dale, what do you think would be one of the necessary requirements for any military messaging system? And I was like, that headquarters keeps a copy. And he's like, just turned and walked away from me. He didn't even say anything. He was just like, that's it, I'm out. And walked away. I was like, oh, fuck. And so if you really want to delve into some great conspiracy theory stuff, look at the guy who they used to call him, he's considered the godfather of the internet, or they called him God of the internet.
Gore?
No. Nice, thank you. Yeah, it's too good a setup not to say. Yeah, he help yourself. I forget what the guy's name is. The guy, one of the designers, you know, part of the ARPANET, DARPA project, and all of that. And look at what happened to that guy. There's a great story about when he actually pulled the entire internet offline briefly to fool around with something. I don't know. It's an interesting story. It was in Wikipedia. I don't know what that turns out to be. There's another USAID.
Yeah, I was going to say, what are the chances that once Wikipedia went woke, USAID had something to do with it?
Hey, he who
are you talking about Vinton Cerf?
Something like that. Yeah, I think that's the guy.
It's either Vinton Cerf or Robert Kahn.
Could be. I can't remember which one, but he died under odd circumstances, and he had pulled the internet offline one day. He was doing something, and 10 minutes later, I believe he had a call from the president of the United States. It was Bill Clinton was calling him.
Yeah,
it's like, what are you doing? He's like, what? So there's some great, I mean, really fascinating things about that. All of which is to say, we have been living, and I think Benz has been saying this, and I saw a tweet from Mike Benz about this. He said that we're finding out that we've been living a curated reality, a manufactured reality for a long time now. And to me, the closest thing, all these exposures and what's going on and people losing their minds and all of it now looks to me the closest analog I can think of is the collapse of the Catholic Church. You know, that for centuries, the Catholic Church had it
seems to be a pretty durable collapse, though, for the Catholic Church.
Well, yes, I suppose. But then by comparison, look where we are today and look at what, you know, how many Protestant sects there are.
There are many Protestant sects, and it has certainly, you know, it is not both the government and the religious arm of our life anymore. Right. But I'm still impressed / appalled at the number of friends I have who are still adamant Catholics. Well,
you know,
there's no level of malfeasance that will persuade them, like, no, man, this is not a good organization. There are systemic issues problems here. This is not a one-off issue you're facing here.
I was raised Catholic, raised in that faith, and it still calls to me. It still sings to me, and yet jokingly but kind of seriously refer to the Holy Father as commie pope on the regular. I think I would be excommunicated tomorrow personally by Pope Francis. And I disagree with almost everything that comes out of his mouth. I don't believe in any of it in the sense of I don't believe in papal infallibility. I'm way past the tooth fairy kind of stuff. But it is interesting to look at it and look at how it survived. And you're right, people maintain their loyalty to it, their love for it. And so I think that's a great analogy to look at what people are going to do with the US government. It's like, no matter how much how bad the exposure is, no matter how much USAID, you got people out there screaming at the notion that how can Elon Musk be doing this? And this is terrible. And why is he exposing this? And you know what I mean? It's like the Catholic priest abuse scandal. People will scream about the fact that you expose this and not the fact that you get Catholic priests diddling kids on the reg. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I just think that's a good analogy for people to a model for people to look at. And you're right. Is the US government going to go away? No, it's not going away, not anytime soon. But
certainly in my life, I've taken that as a barrier to entry, if you will. That I haven't created a hard and fast rule around that yet. But like, if your first instinct is to protect the authority by blaming the victim, like, hey, you need to be socially ostracized, and while I can't ostracize you socially at large, I'll certainly cut you out of my circle.
Right, for sure. Or you can hope, if it was somebody well, what you're really hoping for is, and you understand this, I mean, you deal with people who all the time who are struggling to get over and come to grips with team reality.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I mean, that is what we're talking about, is just taking the world as it is and what presents itself as what it really is, rather than what you'd really like it to be. And nah, I can't hear you. USAID is fine. It is a wonderful organization. You know what I mean?
Right.
And the same thing for the US government. Somebody posted, Matt Taibbi had a great analogy. The picture on the cover of his recent article, he was talking about some of this, and it was Godzilla. He said that he wrote a little quick piece about how Godzilla was, Elon Musk was like Godzilla stomping around DC.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, absolutely, man. I hope he rips the Washington Monument out of the ground while he uses his laser eye beams on the Fed, and then stomps down the mall and jams that pencil right down into the Capitol dome. I hope Godzilla destroys it all. And it's hard, as a guy who worked for the government for, I was a Marine for 30 years plus, worked at the agency as well. I would say that I have lost my religion. I lost my belief in the secular, the religious belief in government as the solution to all things. And I think I come out of this, all of this is terrible, the things that are being revealed and how people's money has been used and all that. But my hope is that even if it only changes the minds of a handful of people and makes them give up their religion, their belief in this false god, in this idol of government, it will have served a useful purpose.
I did hear Mark Andreessen talking about this the other day, who was one of the, not the founder of the internet, but created the first browser. And he'd said that, like, there's 20% at one end of the spectrum. They're dedicated leftists, statists, liberals, whichever phrase you want to give them. The other end of the spectrum, you have the dedicated 20% libertarian conservatives who anti-authoritarianism. And then in the middle, you have this 60% swath. And I think that we're going to get more than a handful. That I think that 60% is now going to go towards a small government mentality, and just are going to be appalled at many of the things that the government's tried to do over the last the last decade, people who were pounding the table 4 or 5 years ago that you shouldn't be allowed in public or to have a job or to keep your children if you didn't get the shot, are going to adamantly declare that was ever their position.
Well, yeah, that's the old, like, how many people actually saw the Mets win the World Series in 1969?
Right.
Shea Stadium holds like 38,000. There's about 1.5 million New Yorkers who are like, I was there when. You're like, okay, sure, yeah, right. Sure.
Right.
It's like the same number of
people. My dad actually was at Woodstock, man.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I actually was conceived at Woodstock. I think the secular religion is collapsing, and it's interesting. I mean, it has had, I think, and I will tie its run to something that I've been adamant about. People, man, I've taken heat for writing about this, but it really begins with the income tax. It really begins with the ability to take. People don't appreciate this whole thing with Trump and tariffs. It's, people are like, oh God, he's a lunatic. I'm like, right. He's a lunatic. Except for the fact that for the first 135 years of the Republic's existence, from 1775 or 1787, let's say, depends on whether you want to count the Articles of Confederation, but from 1775, 6, 7, whatever, through 1913, call it 130, 140-ish years, we didn't have an income tax. There was no income tax. Like, you did not give any of your salary to the FedGov, none of it. And how did we build roads and have an army and have a military and have a Marine Corps and have Navy and kick the shit out of any country that fucked with us? I mean, how did all that happen? Tariffs, largely. I mean, we didn't have an income tax, right. And it was that piece of shit Wilson. And so we got an income tax, and at the time that was sold on the public on the notion that we had to have it for, of all things, World War I, and that it would never be more than 2%. The American people would never stand for anything more than 2%. And now it's become fully accepted that everybody's paying. The average is 20%, sort of across the swath. If you average those at one end paying 40%, who are higher earners, with those down below paying nothing and all that. But I mean, we're at 20%. We went to war. We fought the British over exactly what is being exposed at USAID, which is that we were being told, the colonists were being told, that we were going to have to eat more taxes, a 2% tax on tea, because the British East India Company was collapsing and overburdened with debt, because they had been running the empire fundamentally for the Brits for a long time. And we were like, what? Give money to your corporate cronies? F you. We'll dump that tea right in the fucking harbor, And now we're looking at USAID, and you got people screaming at the top of their lungs trying to defend, trans operas in Ecuador, or whatever, the 5.5 million or whatever. Right. So I think
that's probably going to be one of the levers that Trump will try to use to do away with the income tax. Although if he's going to do with the income tax, he has to get it off of as a constitutional amendment. It has to be withdrawn, because the minute he does it, in 10 years they'll go, hey, well, we've got this on the books. We can go ahead and tax their income. Let's go ahead and start doing that again.
No, it has to be a constitutional.
They will manufacture a crisis to figure out how to tax us.
Of course. But you're seeing, look at the way these politicians, look at these scumbags screaming about how unjust it is that they're not allowed to spend your money the way they want. It's an insane thing to witness,
Well, I think a lot of the politicians do not realize that there has been a ground shift underneath them. Yeah. And like seeing Bernie Sanders say, I pound the table and say I didn't take any pharmaceutical money, and then he was like, well, it was $1.5 million out of 2 million,
and then he's got to be
the second largest.
And then he's got to be ready with his cover story for it, which is, well, those were small dollar donations.
Except they weren't.
Okay, here we go. Right,
yeah.
So
they're not used. They're used to the media covering for them, which the media is not being paid for by USAID anymore, so they're not running those cover stories. They're also not used to just the populace being able to go, hey, here's a community note. That's not true.
That the internet and that's of course part of what we saw with COVID, and all of that was an attempt. in many ways the Counter-Reformation. That was the attempt to smother the information that was getting out. I mean, really, the internet has been, it's like nothing is new, really. But we're looking very much at I think the same thing as the Protestant Reformation, with the printing press and people getting access to the Bible themselves, and you don't have to get revealed truth through the priests, and all of that is, I mean, the reporters and they have all been the priests of this entire secular religion. They told us what we could do, what was acceptable to believe, where the acceptable Overton window of opinions was. And that's all coming unglued. And by the way,
you want to talk about a shift in culture that took place, at the turn of the 19th century, before World War I, prostitutes, actors, and reporters were all at about the same social strata. And if we could get back to that, I think I'd be okay with it. Because like OnlyFans has really elevated the state of women in the business, and I think if we bring the others two down, I think
actors and reporters would be good. Well, they're headed that way. I mean, it really is headed in that direction. We're watching the collapse in real time of institutions, and it's glorious. I mean, again, I really believe that what we're witnessing, and I think as a consequence of it, we're witnessing the collapse of the state religion. And the question is, and for people like you, and me, who believe in something higher and something more, I think we're going to see people turning to spirituality. Now, of course, it's going to lead, just like the Reformation did. You're going to all kinds of crazy splinter sects and people doing weird stuff, and that's sects, SECTS, not sects, SEX.
Well, that is the problem with freedom, is that, everybody's like, I'm pro freedom until they see somebody make a mistake, and they're like, well, not if they're going to do something wrong. And it's like, well, that's what you get to do with freedom. You get to make mistakes, you get to stub your toe and figure it out and go, maybe I should.
It's the hardest thing about parenting. It is the hardest thing about parenting is telling your kids, is sort of having this moment of like, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And there goes the fork in the outlet, and then there's a certain point, I think dads are better at this than moms. Moms run to stop it, and dads are kind of like, okay, here we go. And I mean, you can't stop people from, you can't stop them from finding out the hard way. This is Dale's theory, of course, that there is only one way to learn, and that is the hard way.
Right. Well, it's in the spiritual world, I say the only way that adults truly learn is through massive trauma.
Right. And if you find yourself suffering, this might be a good way to kind of put this out to people who are watching this. And I hope even people on the left will, my brothers and sisters, I love you all, but I hope they'll get with Team Reality and realize that if you're finding yourself traumatized by what's going on, you should probably think about maybe how hard you're gripping on what amounts to a massive fraud organization, and how you're defending that. And you ought to give consideration to maybe letting go and looking internally, and why is it you're gripping so hard on that?
It's interesting, if I may. There's this notion in 12-step recovery where the first step to any rehabilitation process is just honesty, awareness. Right. And it feels to me like this notion of radical transparency, what Elon's trying to do, put everything out in the public sphere, I think is the first step of creating trust and accountability in this, political process that has been corrupt for so long. Just wanted to get your guys' take on this notion of radical transparency.
Yeah, I mean, that, like you said, the first step is admitting you have a problem.
There's another phrase: disclosure is disinfectant. That, like, if you just drag things out into the sunshine, either if the truth kills something, it probably didn't deserve to live.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a wonderful thing to watch. Because I'm not invested in, like, if the government collapsed tomorrow, I think that would be great. I really do. There's a lot of people like, what the hell's wrong with you? And again, if you have that,
I think this goes back to one of the things I'm probably going to mangle a Mark Twain quote here, but he said, it's much easier to fool somebody than it is to convince somebody that they've been fooled. And like there can be a lot of these people who are like, you know, when I get snookered, I'm upset that I got snookered. And then there's other people who are like, how dare you point out that I've been bamboozled?
Yeah, well, that's
let me live with my bamboozle and delight.
Carl Sagan has that quote about the bamboozle, about the power of the bamboozle. It's a great quote. And he talks about people rejecting evidence of the bamboozle because nobody wants to admit they've been bamboozled. And that sounds crazy. Like, oh, that's not true. But I'll tell you what, a lot of crimes, as a prosecutor and defense attorney of many years, I can tell you that a big part of why crimes go on, like if you look at a guy like Bernie Madoff, he clipped rich people, smart people. He got people, and it went on and on and on. And you go, how could it go on and on? And I'll tell you, even after smart people had found out, oh my God, I got screwed. This guy cleaned out my savings, millions of dollars. People didn't come forward, and people didn't say anything until after it finally broke and the whole thing came apart. And then these two came out like, oh my God. And you find out the same thing with the Epstein flight.
Well, there were two or three mathematicians that looked into Bernie Madoff, and like there were two or three mathematicians. There was one trader who all looked into it, tried to take it to federal agencies, and they were like, nope, not looking at it.
Because nobody would come forward. And it is exactly that. It's the same thing when these things finally break years later, when, you know, the Diddy parties comes out, when the Epstein flight logs comes out, people will start coming out, and then it'll be a massive flood, and it'll be like, wow, why did that? Geez, if they had all this info, why didn't that come out? Or if you knew, and what you'll find out is that some people did, and you know, it was ignored and all that, and that's part of it. But a lot of it is the people don't want to admit is just the shame, this huge sense of shame about being played. No one wants to admit that they were the sucker. No one wants to admit that they were the mark. You know, I mean, nobody wants to admit that. It's hard. Hard to admit you were the sucker. And so to your point, Jay, a lot of this radical transparency is forcing people to confront, you know, some very, very uncomfortable truths. And I'm all about it, even to the extent that it gores my ox, whatever it is that I believe in. You know, if it came out tomorrow, it's like the Marine Corps was an organization filled with homosexual pedophiles, whatever. I'd be like, wow, that's fucking missed that, you know. But if the evidence were overwhelming, I would have to be like, you know, you got to just come to grips with it. Like,
well, when Tailhook came out on the Air Force, that was not a shining moment for the military.
Yeah, Tailhook. I tell you, it's funny. Tailhook that happened right as I was coming through flight school, and holy shit, yeah.
So you're claiming you missed the good times.
I had one taste of it, and I tell you what, Jake, this is my one Tailhook related story, and I was kind of like, I was horrified. So it's my sophomore year, and you got to remember, here's Dale's origin story, right? So I've done research in astronomy and astrophysics, and I think I'm going to be a research nerd. This is in 86, 87, and I had some offers to study astronomy overseas and Italy at an observatory and had all this stuff. But Top Gun came out, and I saw Top Gun, and I was just like, oh my God, kissing Kelly McGillis. You know, I'm all over it, man. You know, flying jets and kissing Kelly McGillis, right? So that came out in like 86, I believe it is. And 3 years later, 1989, so I went and I got an ROTC scholarship to college. I went to Boston University. By my sophomore year, during the summers, they send you off as a midshipman. I'm a midshipman third class, your second summer. You go to something called Corps Tray Mid, and it's training midshipman is what it is. And they send you for a week. You get to spend a week during the summer with each of the major warfare specialties, they call them. So you spend a week with surface ships on a ship. I spent 3 days on a submarine, on a nuke sub under the ocean. Knew I wasn't cut out for that. And then you get an aviation week. And you have to, where you go depends on, they put you through swim test, everything. You got to get through what they call D West. You got to get through the swimming and the quals in order to be able to go to jets and get a ride in a jet. And I nearly fucking drowned, but I made it. And that entitled me to go close center.
Even though you were shaped like a flotation device, yes, you're not exactly floaty.
Yeah, you can see how much buoyancy I might have. In fact, when I got to the end of the pool, I thought there was a moment when I was on the last lap of the swim, full gear swim, having to do a breaststroke, and I'm basically not coming out of the water. So like I go swim and I go to pull my head up and I'm still like 6 inches under the water. And I'm like, and just drinking the pool. I probably drank the pool down to where I could get my head out and get a breath. But I got to the end. I thought I was going to die about 10 yards. I'm like, I don't have anything left. And I wanted to get a ride in that plane. I wanted to be Top Gun so bad. I was like, fuck it. They're going to pull me out of this pool. I'm not stopping. They'll pull me out dead, but I'm not stopping. And I remember having this sense of people around cheering and everything. And I somehow was like, I'm going to fucking die. And then I was at the end. And I remember I was exhausted. I was crying, but thankfully I was in a helmet, water coming down on my face, and nobody could tell I was crying. I was wrecked. And I was like, ugh. And I got out of the pool. Senior chief or something came over, dragged me out by my gear, pulled me out like a soaking wet dog or cat, out of the, and he pushed me up against the wall, and I sat down, and he goes, "Sir, you can't swim for shit." He goes, "But I'll give it to you. You got some balls on you." And I was just sitting there like, So I get my ride in the jet. And as it turns out, as fate would have it, I get assigned to the Sluggers. And I think that's VF Navy Fighter Squadron 101. I believe it's VF 101, the Sluggers. And that was the squadron that Tom Cruise had done some of the flying with. And so after all that, I get to go down to VF 101 to the Sluggers. I'm hanging out with them. And so here's not long, 3 years, almost to the day from when I saw Top Gun. I'm now with the squadron that Tom Cruise was with, and we go to the O Club. So we're kind of getting settled in early in the week, and we're like, oh, this is cool. We're hanging out with the jet guys, and we go over to I'm on the East Coast. This was at a Naval Air Station, NAS Oceana. So we go over to Oceana, and you can play they've got a beach they got the beach volleyball, homo bullshit, all of it is there. And outside the club, and so right on. And I'm at the club. We're at the club one day aboard Oceana on a Wednesday, going over to get something to lunch. And the guys are like, yeah, come on, let's go get some lunch. We're going to show you there. It's me and a few other midshipmen. And we go over there, and they have fucking strippers in the O Club at Oceana. This is 1989. And I'm in there, and I'm like, I'm a little bit kind of straight-laced and naive and, Catholic raised. And we're in the O Club, and there's strippers in the O Club. And I'm like, and I was, I wanted to be a Marine. So I'm a lot more like, the Marine Corps is like they're like the Jesuits of the armed forces. The Marine Corps is like the Crusaders. They're the, the Knights Templar of all the armed services. And I'm looking at this going, we're supposed to be, these guys are officers and gentlemen. And it was, we got people swinging, dancing on the tables, crawling all over guys in their flight suits. And I was just like, and so fast forward a few years when I'm at flight school, and tailhook had hit, I think, while I was at infantry school. And I mean,
tailhook was 91.
Yeah, I was just at infantry school. I was digging a ditch in the hill, but they froze. I mean, the CO of the Blue Angels got relieved. I mean, a lot of people got schwacked, and rightfully so. They were doing stupid shit. I mean, stupid shit. And so, I had to come to grips with internally with what naval aviation was really all about, and that wasn't
working the joystick.
yeah, something like that. But it's we're witnessing in real time people having to confront the idealistic notions that have been planted in their brains about what government is and does, up against the reality of like, hey man, this is just, check it out.
Yeah.
It's, and so I think you're going to get more customers, but I think you're going to see more people doing breath work. You're going to see more people, looking for something spiritual. And I'm like, right on, people are looking for truth. I mean, here we go. Why is it collapsing? Why does it matter? And I guess this will be the way people sort themselves. The people who don't care will show you that they don't care about what's true, what's beautiful, what matters. And the people who, kind of have to maybe.
Well, I mean, I don't care in the sense that I still believe and strongly believe that if like whoever is elected president affects your life, you screwed up.
Your life
is the dismantling of USAID going to personally affect me in any regards? Not really.
No.
Even though I am cheering for it because I just think it's a cesspool of fraud, and that is something I do value. Is like, hey, let's just be straightforward and honest about what we're doing here, and that will cut off a lot of fraud and deceit if you do what you claim to be doing.
Right. Mike, but Ben's had a great line about this on Twitter, which was, if USAID was really doing all those things, saving lives in all these countries and helping poor people and widows and orphans, then where are the presidents and prime ministers of those countries screaming about how they've got people dying in the streets kind of thing?
Right.
As a result of the loss of the money. But the fact of the matter is, people have been for years pointing out, how did these politicians on $170,000 a year get to be worth 25 million, 40 million? How has that happened? And now we're finding out, and it'll just be a matter of, and by the way, all they're doing, in many ways, I love this, the techniques that were developed, the use of electronic tools to track terrorist networks, which I know a little something about, those tools were turned on the American people. We used them to root out like the FinCEN people, the financial, people who track where the money goes. Those folks eventually, you can find out where the money's going. It all works.
And they've now turned that on USAID,
and they've now turned that.
They've created some beautiful maps of funding that say, hey, Chelsea Clinton's collected $84 million.
$84 million, and
Lindsey Graham's collected, $100-something million. His organization. It's like,
well, in the same way that they did for the Bidens. The Hunter Biden. I mean, all these things. How many different shell companies did Rosemont Seneca have? How many? And all it is it's a shell game. You make it complicated enough. You have these 501(c)s. You have these places where discretionary funds can be put and not tracked. And I mean, but eventually, that SWIFT payment network, the pipes that actually move money around. There's an electronic transaction of all of that. By the way, this is why your life is miserable in anytime you try and use cash now. I went to my bank to try and get just some cash, and like, holy shit! I mean, they act like it was just a couple grand, and they were acting like I was like it was a fucking robbery or something. Get my own money out, and the reason for that is the bank. All this stuff, and this is a rant for another day, but all of this government surveillance, all of this stuff, it's not intended to prevent fraud. They don't give a fuck about any of that. It's the government's reach inside of the banking system, where now we've destroyed the common law notion of bailments, of that you can have somebody, you can give somebody something and they hold it for you, like a safe deposit box or whatever. And of course, hard cases make bad law. So they always say, oh, that's what the Nazis did. That's how they stole all the stuff from the Jews. And therefore, nobody can have any banking secrecy. Nobody can have any, nobody can have privacy at all. And we have, with the whole reasonable expectation of privacy thing, we've destroyed the entire notion. It used to be the law of bailments was if I wanted to keep something private, right, but I don't want to keep it in my house, I could give it to you, the bailee, and then you would have a duty to keep that safe and all of that. And the government can't stand having secrets kept from it, but it loves keeping secrets from us.
Well, it also wants to make sure it collects its VIG.
Well, exactly. And so what's happened is everything now, banking transactions, all of that, every almost like your phone records, everybody now, all of these nominally third-party corporations are really just work for the government. I mean, the whole argument about that the government has the right to intercept and take your cell phone metadata and all of that stuff, the phone companies all turn it over. And the whole basis for it is, well, you gave it to a third party, therefore you have no reasonable expectation of privacy. That's, again, another horrifically shitty decision by the Supreme Court. Thanks a lot, black-robed idiots. But that reasonable expectation of privacy doctrine has destroyed the law of bailments, and now none of us have any privacy in your banking, in your phone calls, in your email. And it's been bad, horrible. I hate it, but boy, am I glad to see it turned on the people who've been using it on us. I mean, it's glorious. I'd love to see Lindsey Graham's banking records. I mean, he gets to see mine if he wants to. So let's turn about.
Well, everybody who is adamant that they see Trump's tax returns in no way wants USAID audited.
Right. Yes.
next up is what is next up? Medicare, Medicaid. They're going to audit that, and then they're going to the the Department of Education.
So Hegseth now, Pete Hegseth,
Mm-hmm.
is now Secretary of Defense, and I just saw something this morning, and I'm all about it. And for whatever it's worth, I'm an unabashedly pro Pete Hegseth guy. So whatever his faults are,
He's a handsome devil.
Yeah, I'm pro Pete Hegseth for two reasons. One, he's the guy on the other end of the cases that could be settled that we're discussing right now, and so I'm inclined to look at him favorably, and hopefully he's inclined to look at my clients favorably. But number two is I had a conversation with him about 7 months ago before anybody knew he was going to be nominated for Secretary of Defense, myself included. Back then, he was just a Fox News host, and I was looking to go on Fox News to talk about all these people who refused the vaccine, who got shit canned from the military, who I represent. So I was thinking about going on Fox News, and Hegseth was he's a former Minnesota National Guard guy. And so I had a good talk with him for probably 20, 25 minutes. It was wonderful. He was really, at least on the issues that matter to me, he was remarkably clear-eyed. And then like 3 months later, he was like, yeah, we'll have you on the show. Come on. I'm like, yeah, right on. I said, when there's something organic to talk about, and there really wasn't anything 7 months ago, but last July. And he was pimping his book. And then all of a sudden, doink, 3 months later, he got nominated to be the Sec Def. So I'm inclined to say nice things about Pete Hegseth, but he just posted that, hey, the DOD hasn't passed its last 7 audits. We need Doge to audit the DOD. And can you imagine? You think USAID is corrupt? Holy shit! What will come out if they kick that over?
Well, I was under the belief that most Medicare, Medicaid fraud is just what I would consider retail fraud, like doctors, hospitals, jacking up bills, that sort of thing. And it was like, I really don't see the angle for like the way that USAID has been perverted to fund things. He's like, oh, you don't think those pharmaceutical companies are taking all that government money to run those advertisements? And I was like, oh, all right, that's problematic. Okay. Yeah, okay, I see the connection now.
I see how this works now. Hey, during the COVID scam, the government, and I think it was in the Inflation Reduction Act, it was right in there, but there was like $1 billion set aside for media to reduce vaccine hesitancy. As if that's a legitimate function of the federal government, to be reducing your hesitancy to anything, But
I wasn't that hesitant until they started beating me over the head with it, and then I got real hesitant.
Yeah, I wasn't nearly as hesitant until you started trying to force me to take it. Then I got real hesitant real quick.
Hey, we're gonna have people go door to door and stop by your house and make sure you've had your shot. And I was like, I don't think that's going to work out the way you think it is.
Yeah, it's glorious. It's glorious. We're witnessing the collapse of all of it, and man, I tell you, I'd like to see Godzilla fight Gamera on the National Mall or in the courtyard of the Pentagon. And if everything, how in those old Japanese movies, like everything gets destroyed, Tokyo gets completely leveled. If DC got stomped on by Godzilla and King Kong or whatever, I think that would be a net benefit for most of the country.
Yeah, well, Trump's saying he's going to move all the federal employees out of the DC area. I'm like, it's not a bad thing.
No, I think that would be a great. I've always thought
reduce that concentration.
Yeah, put them out in Dubuque, Iowa. Put the U.S. Put some other agency in Topeka, Kansas. Put another agency. I mean, if they got real work and they're doing real work, it shouldn't matter. They don't need to be in DC. Put them. No. We got communications now. With the internet, you don't need to be in DC. But no, it's great. It's glorious.
Any place that has a mid-level college, they should be able to support a federal agency.
Yeah, for sure.
Turn out some bureaucrats for us.
Yeah. I love it. It's all glorious. So for those of you out there who are stressed, don't worry. It's all going to be fine. And just sit back and enjoy.
Damn it, Dale.